how many, how long you've been homeschooling. If you're a homeschooler, maybe you're just investigating it, but that's what that chat box is for. We're going to get to questions, but first, we're going to try to discuss something that, I'm going to say should change your life, like forever at any moment. In fact, changing is not as hard as they think. Everybody's got it down to habits and other weird stuff. And weird stuff. Habits or habits. I'm not calling that weird. But what I am saying is that there is a way better understanding about how life works, how people change, how they learn, how they develop when you get up to the master principle. And here's what I'm gonna tell you. This is, I think, as far as I can make sense of it, exactly uh, why life works like it does, why there's the political conflict, why you have parenting issues, why you have relationship issues, why you have issues with yourself, not getting things done, why you succeed at certain things, because it all comes down to this. Everybody on the planet is basically trying to negotiate with reality. Now, some of us obviously have bailed out on that principle, and we're just in institutions or need to be something like that, or on meds, or something that we've just checked out, and it could be physiological, etc. But on balance, what I'm saying is most everybody is basically most everybody is operating where they're negotiating with reality. And the way we negotiate with reality, it is to use logic. All of us do. We're all logical. Now, what I mean by logic here is not Mr. Spock or something like that, or data, or some uh, uh, spreadsheet-oriented life. What I'm talking about is what makes sense. So what we do in life is we do what makes sense. So when you start to understand this, it can change everything, and it can change it in an instant. The moment you see something doesn't make sense is going to be the moment, the literal moment that you'll change. So I'll give you a dumb example. Maybe I've used it before somewhere. There are a million examples. But so in the Deep South, we have these things. Well, I know they have them everywhere. I remember I was at Jamestown as a kid and got infected with these things. I'm sure they have them up north in the summers, but they're called chiggers or red bugs. And these little nymph stage of this creature will bite, and they bite in tender skin places, behind knees and armpits and privates and stuff like that. And so they make these bites, these whelps. Well, a lot of people, probably even today, maybe some of you, will paint the chigger bite with, I say paint, is that right? Yeah, you paint your fingernails. Yeah, clear nail polish. Or maybe not always clear if you don't have clear. I'm just saying nail polish. Nail polish. So they put nail polish on these bites. They paint them. Now, the reason they do that is because it makes sense to them. And it makes sense because they are under the misunderstanding that the bug, the creature, is in the bite, like it's living in there. Doesn't matter how that came about, from the shape, they were told, who knows. But if you think that the animal is still in the bite, then the painting over suffocates it. Smothers or suffocates. I'm just trying to be meaning neutral. So the whole act of painting a chigger bite makes sense. It just makes sense, and to them. But the moment they discover that the animal's not in the bite, because there are studies on it, there are papers. Texas A&M has a whole paper on it, and the thing is, how would the animal keep its life cycle going? Have you ever seen one of these things? You think they would come out when there are other explanations. It's just they bite, they make a liquid of your skin, they drink that, they fall off, they keep going. And it just leaves a little tube-like thing, and the way it swells is a little round, perfect, I don't know what you call it, uh ball. So so all I'm saying is the moment they get a new fact, everything changes because it now doesn't make sense to put nail polish on a sugar bite. And that's a dinky example, but it is actually how everything goes. When people change on a dime, what happens is they have come to a new place where something makes sense that didn't make sense before, or something no longer makes sense. So if you look at anyone and their behavior, if you look at people who avoid going to the doctor to get tested for what they suspect might be cancer, it makes sense to them not to find out they have cancer, because then they'd be extra miserable or something. They think something. Um, you can look at a child's behavior and say, what they're doing. They're crying, they're upset, they're fighting with you about doing math and all. It makes sense to them. This is part of why I would say once they know what they want is impossible, it won't make sense anymore to try for something impossible, because this is all governed by some hardwired things with us as humans, that we are rational beings. Now, I know people are irrational. I'd call them irrational, but not to themselves. They actually are believing that what they're doing makes sense, given the way they understand things. And what we do is, because what's happening is this way, and I've got to act this way, then the only thing to do is change what's happening, because we don't know we could change what makes sense to us. So my mother was uh, uh, a very on the way out, destroying her life, alcoholic, and had Valium and other things mixed in it. And she had an event as she was going down there, different things we had tried to work with. She'd been out in and out of mental institutions for 1 out of 4 days for a period of several years before they discovered it was alcohol. And so alcohol, you can cover it up with other things, or that's what alcoholics will do, make it look like something else. But she started uh really getting worse and going down, even though there were things family had tried to help her. And something happened that literally, in one day, in one moment, she never drank again for the remaining 30, 35 years. Like, she literally went from drinking herself to sleep, stupor, um, DTs, etc. She's passed now, so she's probably okay with me sharing this story. She would have been anyway, I think. But the fact is, she changed in a moment. And I'm going to tell you why. Because what we're doing with logic and the way we reason is, there are facts and reality. And then there's the way we put the facts together to make sense of things. And so when we get a new fact can change everything, like the sugar bite. Now, the problem is, because we like how things make sense, we aren't open to facts. And you see this in news cycles, one side and the other, they don't listen to things because don't confuse me with the facts. My opinion's made up. And so what we do is we're busy rejecting, distorting, etc. facts, is because we don't want to change. The moment you want to change will be the moment you're open to new information. And if you don't want to change, you're going to cut it out. So back to mom. She called the police one night to get a man out of her house. She was hallucinating and drinking back again, like DTs. Stop. I've been through this with her. And they looked around. Man was not in the house. And they um, sat around the corner. And sure enough, as we'd say in Alabama, she got in the car and drove, and they arrested her for DWI. And so being arrested, and this is, wife of state senator type stuff, former state senator. It's not like, this is not what we do, but this is what happened. And from the hospital, they could tell something was wrong from the jail, something was wrong with her jaw, and they sent her to the hospital, and it was broken. We don't know how it was broken. Could have been the guy she was dating. It could have been she fell off the porch. We don't know. She doesn't know. But from the hospital, she gets home, and part of the process, she has to go to DWI or DUI class. And going to class, she literally is sitting there. Now, she also made a folder of her jaw pictures, hospital arrests, and all. If she was ever tempted again, she told me, I'm going to get this folder out and look at it. But she never looked at it because she's at that class and the instructor, and in a moment of her openness to change, the instructor said, when you get to the stage of alcoholism where you can't have a drink, you have to have many, many drinks. At that point, the only solution is not to have the first drink. So when you get there, you just can't have the first drink. And my mother went, oh, and never drank again. And we know, we've lived, we know. So that is the power of logic. And formal logic, we can have a conversation of that, but I'm talking about making sense of things. That's what we're all trying to do. So let's bring it back to homeschool real quickly. We're asking what makes sense. So in the doing homeschool, like, does doing homeschool make sense? If you decide to do homeschool, you're doing it because it makes sense, as opposed to public school, private school, mass education, something like that. In your context, with whatever you're up to, something makes sense. And it can make sense for a variety of reasons, but it's going to make sense to you to do that and not something else. This is how we make decisions. When you can't make a decision, you can't make sense of what to do. That's how it works. It's all logic. So then you start thinking, so if you have a homeschool and you think you've got to teach the children, you'll put together kind of lesson plans or get a curriculum or something together where you're doing the teaching because that makes sense to you. We, in our understanding, what made sense to us was to help the kids learn to teach themselves, because we were focused on a skill they could develop and keep for the rest of their lives. So that made sense to us and explains the behavior. If you think a child can either do or not do math, some kids can do it, some not, then it makes sense to go easy on the ones that struggle. If you think everybody can learn math to a degree, just like they can all learn to read to a degree, so we're going to learn math, we're going to learn reading, kind of how us. So that made sense to us. You could say it's the curriculum's fault. That's the trouble or the solution, because it makes sense to you that if you have the right curriculum, it'll work great. Or you could, in the same moment, you're saying it's not me. It's not like I'm an issue in the homeschool, because that doesn't make sense, because I'm there and I'm nice and good. So it must be the curriculum's fault. If kids are disciplined, some people would say, gosh, if you discipline your kids, and I mean broadly, the sense of the word, if you really discipline them, then they'll be damaged emotionally because you're not affirming, who they are. And they're just childlike and they're just doing kid things. They don't need to be disciplined and distorted emotionally. Others, what makes sense is, well, if you don't discipline, they'll be spoiled. You'll just really incite and grow a narcissist. So one view is trying to avoid growing kids with poor self-image, and others are trying to avoid growing kids with too great of a self-image. But it's all based on what makes sense. So what we do in these podcasts, lives, these interactions, and while we want questions and all, is we're really trying to help you make sense of things. And the questions you ask are things that don't make sense, or you're making sense and you want some confirmation to, so it's that process of change. People who have it all figured out are not interested in growth, not interested in progress, would never want to listen to this kind of thing. But if you're open to find a better way to make a little better sense of things. That's going to drive new action, and that's going to drive new results. So what we're all trying to do is make sense of homeschool. So what do you want to add to all that?
I don't think that I have anything to add. Although well,
Practical examples, practical thoughts.
no, I liked especially your last thing, like it makes sense. How how they do things. I think so. Just even if something doesn't, we look at a kid, our children, and it doesn't make sense that they're having a fit. Well, okay, it makes sense to them. Doesn't mean it's logical or in the sense of true logic, but it makes sense to them. So even just to start there with okay, what is it that you're thinking?
Yeah, and what do you do with that?
I think you can help them think better if they're not thinking very well.
Right. Well, part of this is where empathy comes from. So empathy, we get it confused. We think empathy's feeling what people feel, but it's not that. I mean, that's a form of it that gets into sympathy and blah, blah with words. But empathy, there's an aspect of it that's simply trying to understand or actually understanding what's going on in another person. So they have a behavior and the behavior makes sense. And so if you can find out how they think, you're in great shape. Now, that doesn't mean you have to agree with them. You know, Daddy, there's a monster in my closet. Okay. So empathetically, it would be, why do you think there's a monster in your closet? We've never had monsters before. We had the guy come and spray for monsters and bugs. They put a monster spray in the bug spray, and did it make a noise? Anything happen? In other words, getting in their mind. Well, I watched. I mean, we had one that was afraid of their shadow. Thing.
After watching a Winnie the Pooh about shadows.
Yeah, about Piglet got disconnected from his shadow and he had to connect it back. And so this child was worried about that because then they think that made sense. So then it makes sense in their world. They could something like that. And so when that's going on, if you can understand what in the world they're thinking, so that if you thought that way, you'd behave the same way, then you can start dealing with the logic of whether it makes sense. Not just say, well, that's not true. But it's more like, I wish I could think of some examples where I do that with kids, or we did. But it's when they are, well, I mean, it was like Brooks that time with the he's mad about advanced math or calculus. Saxon doesn't know what they're doing. And so I said, so he, in his mind, it made sense. They don't know what they're doing. And the reason it made sense is because he couldn't do it. And so he had, if they would explain it right, I can do it. And they're not explaining it right. And the answer is, yeah, nobody explains it right. You have to teach yourself, like you've been doing this for a while. But I had him go through, count up all the lessons he had done, all the problems he had ever done, best we could guesstimate, and gotten right. And since he corrected all the problems, it's just the number of problems in Saxon up to that point, which came out to like 27,000 problems. And I said, somehow with Saxon, you've been able to learn and conquer 27,000 problems, and now they don't know what they're doing. And with Brooks, he went, yeah, that doesn't make sense. It makes sense that they probably know how to explain it, and this is just harder, and I'm going to have to dig. And he did, and he finished calculus on his 15th birthday or the day before or something like that. So it's that game. And so when we interact and you ask questions and we're all trying to make sense of things, when something makes sense in a moment, you can change. And this will affect relationships and communication and work and activities, all kinds of things. So it's learning to how you have facts, how they fit together, how they need to make sense, coherent. But, really, you're already kind of wired for it. If you study it, you can do better. But for the most part, you can't actually hold two contradictory thoughts. And so if you have two theories and one, the moment you see something's wrong, you won't do it anymore. It's just the way it is. If you see people doing things that are wrong, they have some way they think that it makes sense to do that wrong thing. Short term, they had to, it's the last time, I don't know, but they got something. So let's see. Anything else you want to add to that? I wish I could figure out how to do anything. So hopefully we haven't checked, we're online. Hope. Yep. So talk to us. What kind of questions do you have? I didn't get a letter out to advertise, but it'll repost. So questions. I think this is working. What kind of questions are going through life? So, if you have a challenge, this is a way to look at it. If you have a challenge with a kid or with homeschool or with a relationship, it doesn't matter what it is. The challenge is coming because you don't understand something. There's a problem going on, that it's not working the way you want it to work or expect it to work. So essentially what you're saying is it doesn't make sense. That's sort of all you're saying. It just doesn't make sense. And if you can own up to that, then you can ask a question like, what's the deal with that? I was asking a question to myself this morning. I go, why can I indulge in answering? There was a kind of a theological conversation I was having, and I spent about 3 hours on a response. It turned out to be 1,200 words, Facebook post response. So I had to make it into a little paper and put it on Google Drive so people could download it. So, and I was sitting there going, why can I spend that kind of energy on something and not spend energy on things I need to do to advance stuff I'm working on, like making a living stuff and normal life stuff. What is that? So I look at that and I start trying to think through, what in the world, why does that make sense to me to do that? And I think it's because in part I have a belief, or the way I think is that I don't like to start things I can't finish. So I have a hard time getting started. Jody, on the other hand, doesn't like to not start things because she wants to be finished. So she looks at it and goes, if I don't start, I won't get finished. And I look at it and I go, well, if I can't start, then I can't finish it. So why start? And I think I'm in the world of once that doesn't make sense, I'm gonna have to figure out what does make sense. So what questions are on your mind, or what questions do you have related to homeschooling, family, relationship, parenting, learning, that a friend who has a friend who has a question? Yeah, that'll work
That
just
works.
as well. I can also get out for a moment some of our traditional Q&A. I mean, I knew I threw a lot at everybody, so they a lot of times you get to thinking about all this stuff and it's like, oh my goodness, I just need to go think. I don't know what questions to ask at all. But I can be patient. I mean, it makes sense to be patient. That's what I'm trying to say. So, one of the questions, let's add this list of 110 questions. We've answered a few. Let's just do 110. So, how important is it to teach our kids to be positive, and how do we do it? So, how important is it to teach our kids to be positive, and how do we do it? You're first.
Oh man, thanks. To be positive, and how do we do it?
Teach our kids.
Yeah, to teach our kids to be positive. How important. So first of all, is it important?
So you're a positive person?
I think that I'm not the most positive person in the world. I'm not, I always said I was a realist, not a pessimist or an optimist. That might be a cop out. Um, I think that being positive has a lot of benefits to um, living a good life. I don't think being negative is the way to go.
Well, why is that?
So I
I think you're right, but why would that make sense? Let's kind of play along with
okay, and this is
what we're learning.
ballparking. Well, it affect your attitude, positive, affects your whole being, and you're not going
Go with
to
that.
uh, try things or do things or start things if you're not somewhat thinking good about that thing, positive attitude about it. If it was all like negative, you're not going to do it. You know, I hate math. I don't want to exercise, whatever. You're not going to,
Right.
or I
So,
can't do this, or I
yeah.
can't do
Well,
that.
and you're hitting on the crux of it. So when we're positive, we tend to take action. And when we take action, things tend to happen. You know, like Einstein said, nothing happens until something moves. You know, it's a physics thing. But that positive orientation uh means we'll act, we'll give it a try. And the negative, so that's moving forward type orientation. The other is aversion, you know, you're avoiding kind of an avoidance or moving back, moving away from orientation. They call it all these things. So when you're negative about something, they don't want to do it, you don't want to do it, and so there's no action. So that's the challenge. Now, obviously, you can be positively wrong about something, get yourself in all kinds of trouble. I thought I could take that selfie on the mountain,
Oh,
the person explained in the presence of the Lord after falling. So being positive has its risks if it's unchecked, but on balance, you're not going to see action if you don't see positivity.
and I think most people like to be around positive people. They don't really like to be around negative people
Really?
full time
Did
here.
are you
Not we
saying
all have
are
our
you saying Eeyore
ups
didn't
and
have many
downs.
friends?
He was a challenge.
Is that what they said? Poor old Eeyore.
Yeah. So,
It was indeed a challenge. So,
well, and biblically, if that's your thing, it's my thing, where you're called to rejoice always. And that's a positive thing.
well, or whatever is pure or lovely, worthy of praise, anything, pray, all that stuff in Philippians 4:8. Let your mind dwell on these things.
Yeah.
So I would say part of the trick to cultivating uh, a positive disposition is actually uh, a sequence of confidence building experiences. So the greater part of courage is having done it before, because some of this is courage. And so the more they really understand math, if you slow down, they really conquered the math they're on and really understood it. That tends to make them more positive that they can learn the next thing and the next. So part of this is that confidence thing, that experience of being able to do something, and you make them try to do something too far, too beyond them, it does not work well at all. But if you can get them in stages to have experiences that prove they can do it, they tend to be positive about the thing. The other way to go is to encourage a child and yourself to take on things with more of a, it's almost more like a scientist. So you're wanting to be experimental. And experimental means that we're going to do this as an experiment and we're going to learn. So that if the experiment fails, you still learn something. So that's positive. And if it succeeds, you learn something and you kind of got what you want. So a lot of what we try to do, some of what makes sense to us is we spend our energy as humans trying to be sure about outcomes in the future when it's not possible to become sure about an outcome in the future until you're in the future. And so we hesitate and we're negative because it's like I can't predict it. And if I can't predict it, I'll be wrong. So I'm not going to predict, but I'm not going to do either. I'm not going to try. The best way to predict the future is to create it, as they say. But that still involves some risk and challenge. And so the positivity thing is really about learning how to look at things with maybe some kind of risk reward. Is it going to be worth it? And it will be. That's the game that you want to get them to say, look, the benefits of trying and learning and trying and learning, that's how we get to success and a good place in life, because being positive is to some degree about being empowered. And so if you want to empower your kids, you want to encourage them to grow with some orientation of being positive. But here's the trick. All you're really trying to figure out is, why does being positive make sense? And that's the game. And one of the easiest things to do is, if they come to you and want something and do it in a positive way, you're already halfway there to giving it to them. If they come in a negative way, you're already half again further from giving it to them. And once they understand that, they can at least learn how to orient the way they interact and discuss with a little more positivity. Now, nothing I said matters if a person is clinically depressed. That's an entirely different conversation. So just want you to know that, just in case. What do you want to add?
I think that courage thing, going back to the courage thing, is huge, especially we talked before about fixed mindset. But if a child's like, well, I'm not going to try this because I know I won't be good at it. I'm not a sport or whatever. I'm not going to go talk to that person because they probably don't like me. You've killed yourself before you've stopped yourself before you started yourself. And so experimental courage, those kinds of things, like, yeah, maybe they will like you, maybe they won't. We don't know. You don't know until you try. Um, that kind of thing.
It reminds me of the old joke. I don't know when we did it as kids. One time I was feeling down and a friend came to me and said, cheer up, things could be worse. And so I cheered up, and sure enough, things got worse, you know. So it's back to Eeyore. But yeah, so the nature of it is, you don't want to be foolish, but honestly, being completely negative about everything is just simply not accurate with reality. Nor is Pollyanna, being positive about everything. Everything's great. But on balance, if you're going to act, you want to have an understanding in life and skill sets that make sense, that there is a likelihood that you can get to a place that's much better. And we're talking about homeschooling. So in learning, you need to be positive, figure out how to do the actions you need to be able to educate kids to get out and be productive, decent, sane contributors to an otherwise questionable world.
Yep.
Way I'd say it. So, other questions? Y'all usually do better than this, but what is on your mind? What challenge is, or just confirm? Say, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. I had somebody yesterday, and then they asked a question, been a good one to answer. It's probably at the base of the last live stream, but they were talking about a child that was having a struggle with math. They'd done okay, and they switched to some kind of teacher textbook. What was it called? Teaching textbooks. And she'd really gone down, not doing as well. And I went and looked up teaching textbooks, and the reviews weren't so swift. And some of it really gets back to, especially with learning math, they need feedback, some record every day. I mean, some of it I'd switch curriculums, but maybe that one's fine. But if you're not getting what kind of grade do they make? So part of our stress is in teaching math, what you're trying to do is get them to do the number of problems they can do when, as they get older, in 2 hours. We did 2 1-hour sessions broken apart with reading. But in that period of time, how many questions can they do and maintain a 90 or better? So that means they're learning. And if they get below a 90 on average over a couple of weeks, you drop the number of questions. If they're blazing through and they're through in an hour, that's not enough math. So you're trying to work that game, but still they need to have testing. So somewhere on once a week, once a month, at least I would say, you want, I'd suggest to them, you want them to learn how to, in a moment, be able to what you want people, what you want is in this process. I'm sorry, I read something and totally made my brain go in the left direction. What was I talking about?
About if they're in math, to testing them.
Yeah,
to
so
keep up with the
testing, you tend to get more of what you measure, and they need to learn that for schooling. They need to learn how to, in a limited time spot, to handle a little bit of the anxiety, to handle a bit of the challenge, because these challenges are going to come in life, even if it's the last minute details of putting a wedding together. I'm telling you, there are going to be stressful moments, and learning how to focus and get things done. Well, in math, if they're progressively learning it, you should be able to test them, and they should be able to take that test and make sense of it. If they don't, they haven't really learned the math. You're testing them beyond it. Yeah. All right. So this question, and it's obviously a big deal. We've all wrestled with this, but what about people who say homeschool kids don't get enough socialization? And this is one of the stress points and out there with homeschooling. And my first answer is always, yeah, good, because gracious, the kind of socialization you're talking about, like a friend of mine talked about how all his boys, when they went to junior high, they came home with the attitude and somewhat the mouth from being around all their friends. They just had all this terrible attitude about parents and life and whatever. And he didn't see it when they homeschooled him. But socialization, this is a thing in logic that you'd have to define terms. What does it mean to be socialized? Under what? Does it mean to play well with others? Is that what we mean? To get along, to know how to interact? Is the idea that homeschoolers are going to be caught in a world where they don't know how to talk, they don't know how to smile, they don't know how to interact? Well, that's a little tricky, unless it's an only child that you isolate, and you can pretty much get there if you could isolate them in a room and let them game all day, I think. But even in gaming, they're usually at least typing and talking to each other. So humans are naturally going to be able to socialize. But I do agree that it's important to create other contexts. So there's church, and their civic opportunities, their parents, extended family, friendships, etc., where we can be engaged in the process of learning how to get along and cooperate. What the problem with the kind of the factory model of schools is, you're isolating kids in their own age group, their own maturity level or immaturity levels, to call that socialization. And that's really not socializing. It's more categorizing and somewhat corrupting, because they're not getting a range of interactions. And we know the data is pretty clear that kids, even in churches, that stay with churches and stay with their orientation, are the ones that grew up like in worship experiences with different ages and other things with different ages, because we all learn from each other, mixing the older and the younger. The older have some wisdom because they've been through it. The younger are inspiring to the older because they still have hope, or something like that. But yeah, so socialization can be solved easily as an issue, but mostly the people that say it actually don't know what they're talking about. And you want to start with, what do you mean by socialize? And once you get that definition out, you're going to find out, you mean brainwash, Is that what you meant? Oh, you mean learn to smile and get along with others? Yeah, well, they have lots of others. They do this, they have swimming thing, they have these friends. Well, what are you describing, and why magically is putting kids in classes for 8 hours a day over the whole of history the way to socialize? So, good question. Enough of that. My 9-year-old broke down crying yesterday when I realized that she did the wrong lesson in math. So, and you told her, and she realized, she got all the new concepts wrong and realized she went one lesson ahead. I had her go back and do the correct lesson. She does half a lesson in an hour, so I figured it would be okay, but I got a lot of pushback and tears. Was that too harsh of me, or is there a character issue on her part? Well, so why would it make sense for her to be upset? And if we get in her mind, like we're talking about, it makes sense that she would be upset because, oh, I did my math. I did it as best I could. My math was over. I could go on to something else. And then I discovered, not by my mistake, but yours, that I have to do all the math over again. And I used up all my math juices in my
I
head.
can see totally.
Something like that. I'm just imagining if I were a kid, what I'd be thinking. Probably something to learn. I probably would have been totally my fault. I appreciate the hard work. The good news, you did math. The other good news is we won't count this. It wasn't fair to you. Go on to the next thing. My fault. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm not sure where you saw that it was a mom's fault or dad's fault, but it might be in
When
there.
I realized that she did the wrong
Well,
lesson.
she might have just done the
Oh,
wrong
there's a
lesson.
good point. So I apologize. Jody's got a great point. Correct lesson. She does. Okay. So we don't know that. My 9-year-old broke down crying yesterday when I realized that she did the wrong lesson in math. If she picked it out and she did it, then she needs to learn. So I get that. All right. So this has to change it because now it's on the child. I probably would have started with,
How did that happen? That's what you
yeah,
say.
I would want to know this. I'd want to know the story. So I'd say, okay, so you did the wrong lesson. Get them admitted, they'd do the wrong lesson. And then I'd say, all right, how did you get yourself to do the wrong lesson? What'd you do? Well, I got my book out, I turned to this and turned to that, and it was the wrong lesson. And so the other thing I would do probably would be I learned from studying systems dynamics that you don't want to change things when one thing happens. So, like if a factory's throwing off bolts, Deming talked about this, and you get a bad bolt, you don't recalibrate all the machines, you measure it because there are going to be some one-offs. So, if this is a one-time occurrence and we can understand what happened, that we need to put a bookmark or a paper clip in the right place, or you have a procedure of you got to look at the last
Look
lesson
at
to see
your,
where you are, or something like that. There's something that happened in this process. But I would probably be prone, if they'd worked on math for that period of time, I would call that math work.
yeah.
And if it's a one-time thing, probably wouldn't have them redo it. If it became a pattern, that would be a different issue completely.
Yeah, if they were constantly,
Yeah, it would be
but
a big time
yeah, I
different
don't,
issue.
I think all that's
Yeah.
true.
So I don't know how that works. Let's try that. See if it worked. Yeah, so that I don't know that you were too harsh, you're learning. You might have been tough on her, maybe she can handle it. I don't know all the story behind it. But you add here, I'm sorry. I realized that when she gave me her work to grade, she usually jumps into math by herself in the beginning. She turned to the wrong page.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so she made a mistake. Mistakes, one time, mistakes, two times, three times, four times. Yeah, this isn't a mistake. This is a pattern, So that's where it's a judgment call. But mostly what you're trying to work towards is we want you to work on math every day. So it doesn't work or something goofed up one day, that's not a big deal. But we want you to work on math every day. and we need a system to make sure we're working on the right math. She is, after all, 9 years old. And even though she may think she understands all of reality, you and I both know she probably has a thing or two more to learn. But yeah, so you realized it when she gave you the work, and it's like, oh dear, you did the wrong problem.
This is why that's actually would be relieving in a way that why you missed them.
Yeah, so here's a note that says I've been taking a lot of advice from Charlotte Mason, and they focus on giving full attention and focus and best effort. Yeah, so that's really quite what you want to reward is effort, because the effort is the issue. The result is an issue, but it's secondary. If you turn into all effort, I mean, all results, this is where you get into the fixed mindset problem, where all that matters is the result. Now we're back to positivity and negativity. So if I can't produce a result, I won't try it. Rather than I really want to try. Now, don't do what my dad did to me, which is he taught me. He said, "Son, I just want you to do your best." And then I do my best, and he'd say, "Well, you could have done better, because you can always do better." So he had a definition he gave me that doing your best is never your best, but if you don't do your best, then you did your worst. And
An impossibility.
yeah, it hasn't affected me at all. Yeah, it's something you have to eventually sort out, as it were. But that full attention and focus and best effort. I mean, I don't know about. I'm not sure if we have to define best because it's so circumstantial. Circumstantial best regarding what that day, how they were feeling, what they know. But you want to. I would almost say I'd like a word like a noble effort, an honorable effort, a respectable effort, because I don't know if good, better, best we can actually get to a place where a kid would understand really what we're talking about. But a noble effort
Like that
is probably a thing to work with. But yeah, I quite like that for sure. Yeah, I have to go watch later. Yeah, Greece socialization public school can be negative at times. How can we protect homeschool kids from bad influence like other environments? Yeah, so and that's part of the challenge, that when we're trying to um, uh, grow up kids, having them in challenging environments where they've got to make decisions about how to handle difficult people. Well, that's an age appropriate issue too. You don't do that to third graders, you know. They might in high school and debate or something later. And this gets into the whole things of bullying, all kinds of stuff. But environments, avoiding every difficult environment on the planet isn't smart, because you can't.
No, you can't.
You got to get prepared.
Right.
But when you're ready for it, I would say environments somewhat, in a way, it's like a swimming pool, like swimming. So when you know how to swim, that environment is an environment you can handle.
Safe.
You don't drown. It still has some risk in it. You still can drown. You can bump your head. People can play too rough. You can get caught under your foot and get caught in something. All kinds of things can happen. But for the most part, you're in a good place. But we're not throwing toddlers in that have had no training with how to get on their back and paddle up to the top. They have some toddler training. But that's the kind of the issue of the picture, that environments, when you think about it, if you're putting your child in an environment that really isn't going to help them develop and grow, or isn't good for what you're trying to nurture, it's not a good environment. Stay away from it. It's a harm. When an environment makes sense, maybe it's something they want to do, maybe it's challenging, maybe there helps folks, etc. You still do it in a safe or sane way. But that is I think it's a really crucial thing to hang on to, that what you're trying to do is create a good environment in the home. You want them to have friendships in the houses with good environments. If they're not good, and good, you have to figure out what that means, but supportive, safe, decent, anything in that direction, that's what you measure. Other environments are just simply not good for them. I remember one of the things I did, if I have a son that's a reporter for a national news organization now, and got a degree in corporate communication. He's, journalist, writer, does all this stuff. He one time came to me when he was, I'm guessing, 14.
Yeah, that's
We were
right.
here, 14, 15, somewhere like that.
Yeah.
And he said, "Hey, Dad, I want to be a skater." And I said, "Like, you want to go to skate parks and skate all day and wear golf stuff?" This was back in the day. I don't know what they do now. And he said, "Yeah, that's what I want to do." And I said, "Yeah, I thought about it for about that long." I said, "Yeah, we're not skaters. That's not our identity." And we live out in the country, and it'd be 20 minutes from a skating place and putting you in that thing. And how would you get back? And how would you walk? And how would you do this? And then what they're doing and what you're up to is school and all isn't that much of a match. But I tell you, when you get out, you're 18, go be a skater, go be anything you want, go for it, man. But right now, I'm doing my best to try to get you ready for life. Well, if you look back and see the course of life and what he's doing, what he likes, if he'd been a skater, he never would be a journalist for this very famous national organization. So all I'm saying is sometimes you just go, yeah, that's not a match, not who we are. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that you can't go to that friend's house, but they can come here. Or
Yeah,
you can't
sometimes that's
be,
true. Yeah.
or sometimes I'm sorry, we're not gonna pursue friendship with you. You can be friendly with that person, but we're not gonna pursue a friendship with that person.
Exactly.
Things
All
like
right, got chance for one more question. And then we're out of there or out of here. Anything else you have about this? I do think what we do is important together to make sense of what we're up to. And I probably ought to do a talk on or training on how to look at a child's behaviors and just like I did and try to figure out what she's probably thinking.
Yeah.
I can miss it, but if you learn to do that, you can develop a kind of empathy and understanding, and you can know how to help them change, which is part of your parenting thing. You're trying to help
the
them grow.
empathy, the understanding, the making sense of it doesn't mean they're right and you just feed into that. It just means you have a
Yeah. I'm not going to buy that there's a monster in the closet, but I can say, so if I thought there was a monster in the closet, I'd be upset too. Now, they may be scamming you. So do they really think it, and why? So where did you get the idea there's a monster in the closet? And they say, well, I saw this whatever, and the door was closed. I mean, the door was open so a monster could get in. And I said, so you're saying I do logic now and say, you're saying if we actually checked your closet and then closed the door, there'd be no way for a monster to get in. Well, let's knock that one out. Every night, we'll just open it. Is there a monster? Check. No monster. Monster check. Door closed. We're done. Could be the other way. It's open, so I can't see there's not a monster. Great. Let's open the closet. If that is magic to you, So it's and even with the shadow, we had a kid that was freaking out about their shadow. And then so I got a light and I told him what their shadow was, that it can't get unstuck. And I just showed them it's always there. It's always there. And you can always go in front of a light and see your shadows there. And they were cured instantly because that's what facts and logic kind of do to us. It's really quite exciting. All right. This was fun. Hope you'll pass it along, and we'll be back. We probably, if we're not on, there's probably a reason, like we're about to go on vacation. So we may or may not be on.
we can figure it out
In the next week or two. Yeah, we'll figure it out. It'll all work out. Anyway, hope this was helpful. You guys are doing great. Keep trying to make better sense of how life works, and I think you'll